Picture this. You're standing in the most expensive restaurant in town, wearing your only decent dress, and your ex-husband looks you dead in the eye and says, "Security, get this pauper away from our table." Have you ever felt so small that you wish the ground would just swallow you whole? That's exactly what happened to Serafina Hayes on what should have been just another Tuesday night. But this wasn't just any Tuesday. This was the night that changed everything. Serafina Hayes, 32 years old, once lived in a mansion worth $3 million. She used to drive a BMW and shop at stores where a single purse cost more than most people's rent. But that was 2 years ago. Now she works double shifts at a diner just to afford her tiny studio apartment. Standing in Romano's Fine Dining, the same place where Thaddeus once proposed to her, Serafina felt every pair of eyes burning into her soul. The crystal chandeliers above seemed to mock her thrift store dress. Her ex-husband sat at the corner table with his new wife Vivian, her perfectly blonde hair catching the light like spun gold. "Thaddeus, please," Serafina whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft piano music. "I just need 5 minutes. It's about your mother's medical bills." But Thaddeus Montenegro, the man who once promised to love her forever, looked at her like she was a stranger begging for change. His new family watched in horror as 2 security guards approached. Vivian's parents, the wealthy Ashfords, whispered behind their wine glasses. "Ma'am, you need to leave," the larger guard said, his hand already reaching for her arm. Every person in that restaurant watched as Serafina Hayes, once the queen of high society, was escorted out like a common criminal. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing her shame. But what none of them saw was the manila envelope clutched tightly in her trembling hands. As the cool night air hit her face, Serafina stood on the sidewalk, tears streaming down her cheeks. She looked back at the golden windows of Romano's, where her ex-husband was probably already laughing about the crazy woman who interrupted their perfect dinner. That's when she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter that would change everything. A letter that would turn Serafina Hayes from victim to victor. But what was in that letter? And why was it enough to make her stop crying and start smiling? 2 years earlier, life looked completely different for Serafina Hayes. Back then, she woke up every morning in silk sheets that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her walk-in closet was bigger than her current apartment, filled with designer dresses that had price tags she never bothered to look at. "Good morning, beautiful," Thaddeus would whisper, bringing her coffee in a cup that was part of a set worth $5,000. He was different then. His dark hair was always perfectly styled, and his smile could light up any room. But more than that, his eyes held genuine love when he looked at her. Their mansion sat on 5 acres in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. The gardens were maintained by a team of professionals, and every room was decorated by someone whose name appeared in fancy magazines. Serafina thought she was living in a fairy tale. But fairy tales, as she would soon learn, sometimes have monsters hiding in plain sight. "I have to work late again tonight," Thaddeus said one morning, adjusting his expensive tie in their bathroom mirror. "Big client meeting." Serafina didn't think anything of it. He was building his investment firm from the ground up, and she was proud of his ambition. She spent her days volunteering at the local animal shelter and planning charity events for their social circle. Life was perfect, or so she thought. The first crack in their perfect world came on a rainy Thursday evening. Serafina had planned a surprise dinner for their 3rd wedding anniversary. She'd spent hours in the kitchen, making his favorite meal from scratch. The dining room was lit with candles, and she'd even bought a new dress for the occasion. But Thaddeus didn't come home. She called his office. No answer. She called his business partner. Nothing. By midnight, she was pacing the marble floors of their foyer, her heart pounding with worry. What if something had happened to him? What if he'd been in an accident? Then she heard his key in the door. "Thaddeus." "Thank God, I was so worried," she started, running toward him. But he wasn't alone. Standing behind him, her lipstick smeared and her blouse wrinkled, was his secretary, Vivian Parker. A woman Serafina had met dozens of times at office parties. A woman who had smiled in her face while shaking her hand. The room went silent except for the sound of rain hitting their windows. Serafina felt her world tilt sideways. "It's not what you think," Thaddeus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Vivian stood there like a deer caught in headlights, her blonde hair messed up and her cheeks flushed. She couldn't even look Serafina in the eye. The silence stretched between them like a chasm that could never be crossed. "How long?" Serafina asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah, let me explain." "How long, Thaddeus?" He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she once found endearing. Now it made her sick. 6 months. 6 months. Half a year of lies, half a year of working late, half a year of kisses that meant nothing. Serafina felt something inside her chest crack, like ice breaking under pressure. But the worst part wasn't the affair. It was what came next. "I want a divorce," Thaddeus said, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "I'm in love with Vivian." Within weeks, Serafina's fairy tale became a nightmare. Thaddeus hired the most ruthless lawyers in the state. Men in expensive suits who spoke in legal terms that made her head spin. They had one goal: to leave her with nothing. "Mrs. Montenegro," the lead lawyer said during their first meeting, "you signed a prenuptial agreement. According to this document, you're entitled to nothing from the marriage." Serafina stared at the papers in disbelief. She remembered signing those documents 3 years ago, but Thaddeus had assured her they were just a formality. "It's just to protect us both," he had said. "But don't worry, I'll never use it against you." Another lie. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Every asset, every investment, every piece of their life together was picked apart by lawyers who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to remove. The mansion went to Thaddeus. The cars, the bank accounts, the investment portfolio, everything stayed with him. Serafina's lawyer, a kind older man who worked for a fraction of what Thaddeus's team charged, tried his best. But he was outgunned and outmaneuvered at every turn. "I'm sorry," he told her after the final hearing. "There's nothing more we can do." Standing on the courthouse steps, holding a single cardboard box with her personal belongings, Serafina watched as Thaddeus and Vivian drove away in the BMW that used to be hers. They were laughing. That night, alone in a cheap motel room, Serafina stared at the bottle of sleeping pills she'd bought from the pharmacy down the street. The little white pills seemed to promise an end to the pain that was eating her alive from the inside. She was reaching for the bottle when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Is this Serafina Hayes?" the voice on the other end asked. It was an older woman, her tone gentle but urgent. Serafina almost didn't answer. She was so tired, so broken, that even speaking felt like too much effort. But something in the woman's voice made her pause. "Yes, this is Serafina. My name is Margaret Fuller. I'm a lawyer representing the estate of Cordelia Blackwood. She was your great-aunt on your mother's side." Great-aunt Cordelia? Serafina had never heard that name before. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father rarely spoke about his late wife's family. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong person," Serafina said, her hand still hovering over the bottle of pills. "You are the daughter of Rebecca Hayes, formerly Rebecca Blackwood?" Margaret asked. "Yes, but..." "Then I have the right person. Miss Blackwood passed away last month, and she's left you something in her will. We need to meet." That phone call saved Serafina's life, though she wouldn't understand how much until later. The next few months were the darkest of her existence. She moved into a studio apartment in the worst part of town, where sirens wailed every night and the walls were so thin she could hear every argument, every baby crying, every life falling apart around her. Her old friends disappeared. Turns out, when you can't afford to eat at expensive restaurants or buy rounds of cocktails that cost more than minimum wage workers make in a day, people find reasons to be busy. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations stopped coming. Serafina worked 3 jobs just to pay rent and buy groceries. She served coffee at a diner from 5 in the morning until noon, cleaned office buildings in the afternoons, and worked at a gas station on weekends. Her hands, which once wore diamond rings, became rough and cracked from dishwater and bleach. Some nights, She was so exhausted she fell asleep in her work clothes. Other nights, she lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how her life had become so small. But that lawyer's business card stayed pinned to her bathroom mirror, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, there was still something waiting for her. On a cold December morning, exactly 4 months after her divorce was finalized, Serafina finally called Margaret Fuller back. "I'd like to meet," she said. "I'd like to know about my great-aunt." The law office of Fuller and Associates sat in the historic district, in a building that looked like it had been there for 100 years. Margaret Fuller was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. "Your great-aunt was quite a remarkable woman," Margaret said, pulling out a thick folder. "She built a business empire starting with nothing but determination and a small inheritance from her own grandmother." Serafina shifted in the leather chair, trying to process this information. A business empire? Her mother had never mentioned anything about successful relatives. "Cordelia Blackwood was your grandmother's sister," Margaret continued. "She never married, had no children of her own. When your mother died, Cordelia kept track of you from a distance. She knew about your marriage, your divorce, everything." "She was watching me?" Serafina asked, feeling a chill run down her spine. "She was protecting you," Margaret corrected. "Cordelia believed that sometimes we have to fall completely before we can rise to our true potential. She wanted to make sure you learned to stand on your own before you inherited what she built." Margaret slid a document across the mahogany desk. "Cordelia Blackwood's estate is worth $12 million. Serafina's coffee cup slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor and staining the expensive carpet. $12 million. The number seemed impossible, like something from a dream. "There are conditions," Margaret said, not seeming to notice the mess. "You must prove yourself worthy of the Blackwood legacy. You have 1 year to demonstrate that you can build something meaningful with the resources she's providing." "I don't understand," Serafina whispered. Margaret smiled for the first time since they'd met. "Cordelia started with a small loan and built a network of investments that spanned 3 states. Real estate, stocks, private businesses. She had her fingers in everything. But she did it quietly, carefully. She never flaunted her wealth." The lawyer pulled out an old photograph. It showed a woman with dark hair and determined eyes, standing in front of a construction site. She looked exactly like Serafina. "She left you detailed notebooks," Margaret continued. "Everything she learned about business, about investing, about people. She called them her lessons for living. But most importantly, she left you something else." Margaret's eyes gleamed as she leaned forward. "She left you information about your ex-husband's business dealings. Information that might interest you greatly. What would you do if you discovered the person who destroyed your life was about to lose everything they stole from you?" Serafina spent the next 6 months buried in her gray-tance notebooks. Page after page of business wisdom, investment strategies, and secrets about reading people that Cordelia had learned over decades. But it wasn't just theory, it was a masterclass in power. "Money isn't about having it," one entry read. "It's about knowing how to move it." Every morning, Serafina studied the stock market before her diner shift. Every night, she analyzed real estate deals and business reports until her eyes burned. She quit 2 of her 3 jobs and used Cordelia's seed money to start small, buying distressed properties, fixing them up, and selling them for profit. But the most valuable thing Cordelia left wasn't money. It was information. Have you ever wondered what secrets people keep when they think no one is watching? Cordelia had been watching everyone, including Thaddeus Montenegro. The file on Serafina's ex-husband was thick as a phone book. Bank statements, business records, private emails that somehow Cordelia had obtained through her network of contacts. And what Serafina found made her blood run cold. Thaddeus's investment firm was hemorrhaging money. Bad deals, risky bets, and client funds that had mysteriously disappeared into personal accounts. He was 3 months away from bankruptcy, and he was desperately hiding it from everyone, including his new wife. Montenegro Investments owes $2.8 million to various creditors, one report stated. Primary debts held by shell companies traced back to offshore accounts. Serafina smiled for the first time in months. Those shell companies? she could buy them. Every single debt, every IOU, every financial thread that was slowly strangling the man who had destroyed her life. But revenge wasn't just about money. It was about timing. She spent weeks creating the perfect business identity. Serafina Hayes died on paper, replaced by SH Enterprises, a mysterious investment company that appeared out of nowhere with unlimited funds and an interest in distressed assets. Using Cordelia's network of lawyers and accountants, Serafina began quietly purchasing Thaddeus's debts. She bought them for pennies on the dollar from creditors who just wanted to get paid. Within 2 months, she owned everything that could destroy him. But that wasn't enough. She needed to get close. She needed to see his face when his perfect world came crashing down. So Serafina Hayes disappeared completely, and someone new took her place. What if the person sitting next to you at a coffee shop was actually your worst enemy in disguise? The woman who walked into Thaddeus's country club 6 months later looked nothing like the broken ex-wife he had humiliated. Gone were the thrift store clothes and desperate eyes. In their place stood someone with platinum blonde hair, designer clothes, and confidence that commanded attention. She called herself Sarah Harrison, a successful entrepreneur from California looking to invest in local businesses. Her backstory was perfect, her references impeccable, and her bank account impressive enough to open doors in the most exclusive circles. "Welcome to Riverside Country Club," the membership director had said. "We're honored to have someone of your caliber join our community." Sarah Harrison's first target wasn't Thaddeus. It was his wife. Vivian Montenegro sat alone at the club's restaurant every Tuesday while her husband worked late, or so she thought. She looked lonely despite her perfect makeup and expensive jewelry. Women like her were easy to read once you knew what to look for. "Excuse me," Sarah said, approaching Vivian's table with a warm smile. "I'm new here and don't know anyone yet. Would you mind if I joined you?" Vivian's face lit up like Christmas morning. Making friends had always been hard for her, especially since marrying Thaddeus. His old social circle treated her like an outsider who had stolen their golden boy. "I'd love the company," Vivian said, gesturing to the empty chair. Within weeks, Sarah Harrison became Vivian's closest confidant. They met for lunch, went shopping together, and shared secrets over expensive wine. Vivian had no idea she was spilling her deepest fears to the woman whose life she had helped destroy. "Sometimes I wonder if Thaddeus really loves me," Vivian confessed one afternoon. "He's so stressed about work lately. He barely talks to me anymore." Sarah nodded sympathetically while inside. Serafina wanted to laugh. "Marriage is hard. What kind of work stress is he dealing with?" "I don't really understand it," Vivian said, twirling her wedding ring nervously. "Something about investments and clients. He says everything is fine, but I found him crying in his office last week." Perfect. Thaddeus was already cracking under the pressure. But Sarah's real breakthrough came when she met Thaddeus himself. It happened at the club's annual charity auction, an event that would have made old Serafina sick with memories. But Sarah Harrison belonged there. "Thaddeus, I'd like you to meet Sarah Harrison," Vivian said proudly. "She's the entrepreneur I told you about." Thaddeus shook Sarah's hand with his famous charming smile, the same one that had won over Serafina years ago. But now she could see the cracks in his facade, the tired eyes, the forced laugh, the way his smile never reached his face. "Pleasure to meet you, Sarah. Vivian speaks of you constantly." "All good things, I hope," Sarah replied smoothly. What Thaddeus didn't know was that Sarah Harrison's investment company was about to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. An offer that would save his failing business and put her in complete control of his financial future. But first, she needed to watch him beg. Have you ever watched someone you once loved slowly destroy themselves and felt absolutely nothing? The call came on a Thursday morning, just as Sarah Harrison had expected. Thaddeus's voice on the phone was different, desperate in a way that made her remember why she had once felt sorry for him. "Miss Harrison, I have a business proposition that might interest you." Sarah let the silence stretch just long enough to make him uncomfortable. "I'm listening, Mr. Montenegro. I understand your company specializes in investment opportunities. My firm has some unique assets that could provide substantial returns for the right partner." Translation: He was broke and needed her money to save his company. They met at his office the next day, the same building where Serafina had once brought him lunch during their happy marriage. But the man sitting across from her wasn't the confident businessman she remembered. This Thaddeus had dark circles under his eyes and a nervous twitch in his left hand. Montenegro Investments has been family-owned for 3 generations, he said, spreading financial documents across his mahogany desk. We're looking for a silent partner to help us expand our operations. Sarah studied the papers with the cold precision Cordelia had taught her. Every number told a story, and this story was about a man drowning in his own mistakes. Your client retention rate has dropped 40% in the last year, she observed. Your overhead costs exceed your revenue by $60,000 monthly. And according to these bank statements, you've been using client funds to cover operational expenses. Thaddeus's face went white. Those are just temporary cash flow adjustments. That's called embezzlement, Mr. Montenegro. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an expensive clock on his wall. Sarah watched as the reality of his situation sank in. He wasn't just asking for an investment. He was begging for salvation. What do you want? He whispered. Sarah smiled the same cold smile Cordelia might have used. Complete ownership transfer of all debts and assets. I become the primary partner with controlling interest. You keep 20% and your title, but every major decision goes through me. That's impossible. This company is my life. This company is dying. Sarah cut him off. I'm offering you a chance to save what's left. She slid a contract across the desk. You have 24 hours to decide. After that, I withdraw my offer and you can explain to your clients why their retirement funds disappeared. Thaddeus stared at the papers like they were a death sentence, which in many ways they were. But Sarah Harrison wasn't done playing with her prey. That evening, she attended dinner at the Montenegro house as Vivian's friend. She sat at their dining table, ate their food, and watched Thaddeus struggle to act normal while his world crumbled around him. You seem tired, darling, Vivian said to her husband. Maybe you should take a vacation. I can't right now, Thaddeus replied, avoiding eye contact with Sarah. Too much work. Sarah sipped her wine and smiled. Sometimes the best business decisions are made when we're under pressure. Don't you think, Thaddeus? He looked up sharply, and for just a moment, she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. Not of who she was, but of what she represented, power over his future. The next morning, he signed the contract. What would you wear to your ex-husband's wedding if you wanted to watch his world burn? Serafina, now permanently Sarah Harrison, stood in her penthouse closet, choosing the perfect outfit for Thaddeus and Vivian's wedding reception. It had to be spectacular enough to blend in with the wealthy guests, but subtle enough not to overshadow the bride. After all, this was Vivian's special day. And Sarah Harrison was going to make sure it was unforgettable. The wedding was everything Vivian had dreamed of. White roses, crystal chandeliers, and enough champagne to fill a swimming pool. 300 guests celebrated the happy couple at the most exclusive venue in the city. But while everyone focused on the fairy tale romance, Sarah was working behind the scenes. Mrs. Montenegro looks beautiful, she told the wedding photographer, slipping him a folded piece of paper. Make sure you get pictures of Table 12. The couple there is celebrating their anniversary, too. Table 12 was where Thaddeus's business partner sat with his wife. What they didn't know was that the anniversary couple Sarah pointed out were actually private investigators she had hired. Their job was simple: get close enough to record everything. The first disruption came during the cocktail hour. The ice sculpture, a beautiful swan that cost more than most people's cars, suddenly cracked and collapsed, sending freezing water across the silk tablecloths and ruining hundreds of dollars worth of floral arrangements. Oh no! Vivian cried, her perfect makeup starting to run. How did this happen? Sarah rushed to comfort her new friend while inside. She smiled. A simple adjustment to the venue's temperature controls had done the trick. The second mishap occurred during dinner. The wedding cake, a 5-tiered masterpiece covered in handcrafted sugar flowers, tipped sideways and crashed to the floor in a spectacular mess of frosting and broken dreams. This is a disaster. Vivian sobbed in the bathroom while Sarah held her hand. Weddings are supposed to have little problems, Sarah soothed. It means good luck. But the real show started during the reception speeches. Thaddeus stood up, champagne glass in hand, looking every inch the successful businessman. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Vivian and I are so grateful for your love and support. The crowd applauded politely. But what they didn't see was Sarah Harrison in the back, holding a small recording device. Marriage is about trust, Thaddeus continued. About sharing everything with the person you love. About being honest, even when it's difficult. Sarah pressed play. Suddenly, Thaddeus's own voice filled the room through the sound system. But these weren't wedding words. These were private phone conversations she had recorded during their business meetings. I've been moving client money into personal accounts, his voice said clearly. Just until I can cover the losses from the Henderson deal. The crowd went silent. Champagne glasses stopped moving. Even the band stopped playing. What is that? Someone whispered. But the recording wasn't finished. If anyone finds out about the missing funds, we're all going to prison. I need you to alter the books before the audit next week. Vivian's face turned white as snow. Her new husband stood frozen at the microphone, watching his reputation die in front of 300 witnesses. Thaddeus, she whispered. What is he talking about? But Thaddeus Montenegro, the man who had once called security to remove his ex-wife from a restaurant, couldn't speak. He just stood there as his perfect wedding became his public execution. Have you ever seen someone's entire life collapse in real time? The morning after the wedding disaster, Sarah Harrison sat in her penthouse apartment, watching the news coverage with her coffee. The reporter's voice filled the room with delicious details. Montenegro Investments is under federal investigation following shocking revelations at the owner's wedding reception. Anonymous recordings suggest widespread fraud and embezzlement of client funds. Thaddeus's business partner had already fled the state. 2 major clients had filed lawsuits. The state attorney general announced a full audit of all company accounts. But the best part wasn't on the news. It was the phone call Sarah received that afternoon. This is Vivian Montenegro, the voice said. But she didn't sound like the confident socialite anymore. She sounded broken. I need to see you. Please. They met at a small coffee shop far from their usual haunts. Vivian looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. I don't know who else to turn to, Vivian said. You're the only real friend I have. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Tell me what happened after I left the reception. Thaddeus won't explain anything. He just keeps saying it's all a misunderstanding. But Sarah, those recordings, that was definitely his voice. What are you going to do? Vivian broke down completely. I found out this morning that our bank accounts are frozen. The FBI showed up at our house with search warrants. And the worst part is, I think I might be pregnant. Sarah's mask of sympathy never slipped, but inside, she felt a moment of genuine surprise. A baby would complicate everything. Have you told Thaddeus? I can't. He's having some kind of breakdown. He locked himself in his office and won't come out. I hear him in there, talking to himself, sometimes crying. Perfect. Thaddeus Montenegro was finally experiencing the same helplessness Serafina had felt 2 years ago. But Sarah's victory celebration was interrupted by something she didn't expect. Sitting in that coffee shop, watching Vivian fall apart, she felt something that surprised her. Guilt. Not for Thaddeus. He deserved everything coming to him. But Vivian was collateral damage. An innocent woman who had made the mistake of falling for a liar. There's something else, Vivian said, pulling out her phone. I got a strange call this morning. Someone claiming they could help us. They said they owned Thaddeus's debts and might be willing to negotiate. Sarah's blood turned to ice. What did they say exactly? They want to meet with both of us. Tomorrow night. Some fancy restaurant called Romano's. The same restaurant where this whole story began. The place where Thaddeus had humiliated Serafina Hayes in front of a room full of people. Someone else was playing the game now. But who? And what did they want with a woman who had spent months plotting the perfect revenge? What would you do if you discovered your perfect revenge was actually someone else's master plan? Sarah Harrison spent the entire next day trying to figure out who could possibly know about her connection to Thaddeus Montenegro. She had been so careful, so thorough in creating her new identity. Every document was perfect, every reference was real, every detail had been planned. But someone knew. Someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. The meeting at Romano's was set for 8 o'clock. Sarah arrived early, choosing a table where she could watch the entrance. The same restaurant where her humiliation had started would now be the stage for whatever came next. Vivian arrived first, looking even worse than the day before. Her usually perfect hair hung limp around her shoulders, and she wore sunglasses despite being indoors. "Thank you for coming with me," Vivian whispered. "I couldn't face this alone." Sarah squeezed her friend's hand while scanning the room for threats. "We'll get through this together." At exactly 8 o'clock, a woman approached their table. She was elderly, maybe 70, with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to see everything. She moved with the confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in her life. "Mrs. Montenegro," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of authority. "And Ms. Harrison, thank you for coming." Sarah's blood turned to ice as the woman sat down without being invited. Those eyes, that commanding presence, she had seen them before, in an old photograph. "Allow me to introduce myself," the woman said. "My name is Cordelia Blackwood." The world stopped spinning. Cordelia Blackwood was supposed to be dead. Sarah had been to her funeral. She had inherited her fortune, her notebooks, her entire legacy. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. Cordelia smiled the same cold smile Sarah had learned to use. "Death, my dear, is often greatly exaggerated, especially when you have as many enemies as I do." Vivian looked confused. "I don't understand. Who are you people talking about?" "Tell her, Serafina," Cordelia said softly. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her carefully constructed identity crumbled in an instant. Across the table, Vivian's mouth fell open in shock. "Serafina? As in, Thaddeus's first wife." Serafina, couldn't speak. Her great-aunt, who was supposed to be dead, sat across from her like a chess master revealing the final move. "You played the game beautifully," Cordelia continued. "Every step exactly as I hoped you would. The business training, the identity change, the careful infiltration of their social circle. You exceeded my wildest expectations." "You planned all of this?" Serafina whispered. "I planned to give you the tools for revenge. What you did with them was entirely up to you." Vivian stood up, so fast her chair fell backward. "You're his ex-wife? You've been lying to me for months? You destroyed my wedding, my marriage, my entire life." The restaurant went quiet as other diners turned to stare. Vivian's voice had risen to a near scream. "And now you find out your husband is carrying another man's child," Cordelia added calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. "Have you ever watched someone's world shatter into pieces while yours finally came together?" Vivian collapsed back into her chair like a puppet with cut strings. "What did you just say?" Cordelia pulled out a manila folder, the same type that had started Serafina's transformation months ago. "DNA results. Your husband has been having an affair with his business partner's wife for the past 8 months. The baby you're carrying belongs to Marcus Hartwell, not Thaddeus Montenegro." Serafina stared at the older woman in amazement. Even in her wildest planning, she had never uncovered this level of betrayal. "How do you know all this?" Serafina asked. "Because I've been watching everyone, dear child. Thaddeus, Vivian, Marcus, even you. I needed to make sure you became strong enough to handle the truth." Vivian grabbed the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photographs, medical records, and hotel receipts that painted a clear picture of deception. Her perfect second marriage was built on the same lies as Serafina's first one. "He doesn't know," Vivian whispered. "About the baby, about Marcus. He thinks he's getting a fresh start with a loving wife and his first child," Cordelia finished. "Just like he thought when he married Serafina." The irony was brutal. Thaddeus Montenegro, the man who destroyed lives with his lies, was about to have his own life destroyed by someone else's lies. "Why are you telling us this?" Serafina asked. Cordelia leaned back in her chair like a queen holding court. Because tomorrow night, Thaddeus is planning to ask his wealthy in-laws for a loan to save his business. The Ashford family dinner, where you'll finally get your moment of truth. Serafina's heart stopped. How could you possibly know that? Because I suggested it to them. The Ashfords have been family friends for decades. They trust my investment advice. The pieces clicked into place. The mysterious creditors who had sold Thaddeus's debts cheaply, the perfect timing of everything falling apart, even the wedding reception disaster. It had all been orchestrated by a master manipulator. You've been controlling everything, Serafina breathed. I've been giving you opportunities, Cordelia corrected. What you chose to do with them showed me exactly who you really are. Vivian looked up from the DNA results with tears streaming down her face. What happens now? Cordelia smiled like a cat with a mouse. Now you both decide what kind of women you want to be. Victims who let men destroy their lives, or survivors who take control of their own stories. She stood up, preparing to leave. The Ashford family dinner is at 7 tomorrow evening. Thaddeus will ask for $2 million to save his company. What happens after that is entirely up to you two. Wait, Serafina called out. Why fake your own death? Why put me through hell for 2 years? Cordelia turned back with eyes that held decades of pain. Because the same thing happened to me 50 years ago. I was young, trusting, and married to a man who stole everything I had. But I had no great aunt to teach me how to fight back. I had to learn the hard way. She pulled out an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Local woman's husband disappears with life savings." That woman was me. I spent 30 years building my fortune and my network, waiting for the right moment to help someone else avoid my mistakes. Serafina stared at the yellowed newspaper, finally understanding the depth of planning that had gone into her transformation. Tomorrow night, you'll face the choice I never got, Cordelia said. Complete revenge or something better. What would you say to the man who destroyed your life if you had the power to destroy his? The Ashford mansion was everything Serafina remembered from her wealthy days. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and the kind of furniture that cost more than most people's houses. But walking through those doors as Sarah Harrison instead of Serafina Montenegro felt like stepping into a different world. She arrived early, as Cordelia had suggested. The plan was simple but devastating. Thaddeus would ask for money to save his business, and then the truth would come out. All of it. Sarah, darling. Mrs. Ashford greeted her warmly. So wonderful of you to join our family dinner. The Ashfords had no idea they were hosting the woman whose life their son-in-law had destroyed. To them, Sarah Harrison was just Vivian's successful entrepreneur friend who might be interested in investment opportunities. Thaddeus arrived with Vivian at exactly 7 o'clock. He looked even worse than at the wedding disaster, hollow-eyed and desperate. But he had managed to put on his charming facade for the people whose money he needed. Thank you for having us, he said, kissing Mrs. Ashford's cheek. Family dinners are so important. Serafina watched from across the room as he played the perfect son-in-law. The same performance he had given her parents before their wedding, back when she still believed in happy endings. Dinner was served in the formal dining room at a table that could seat 20 people. Serafina found herself directly across from Thaddeus, close enough to see every micro-expression on his face. So, Sarah, Mr. Ashford said, Vivian tells us you're in the investment business. Among other things, Serafina replied smoothly. I recently acquired several distressed assets that turned out to be quite profitable. Thaddeus looked up sharply at the word acquired. Something in her tone had triggered his survival instincts. The conversation flowed through the first 3 courses. Business, politics, the weather, all the safe topics that wealthy people use to avoid discussing real problems. But Serafina could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. Finally, over dessert, Thaddeus cleared his throat. Actually, I wanted to discuss a business opportunity with you both, he said to the Ashfords. Montenegro Investments is looking to expand, and I thought the family might be interested in a partnership. Here it comes, Serafina thought. What kind of partnership? Mr. Ashford asked. Well, We're looking for investors who understand the value of established relationships and proven track records. Translation: Give me money or I'll lose everything. Mrs. Ashford smiled indulgently. How much of an investment are you thinking? 2 million would allow us to really capitalize on some exciting opportunities. The number hung in the air like a sword waiting to fall. Serafina saw her moment and took it. Before we discuss investments, she said calmly, shouldn't we address the federal investigation into your company's finances? Every face at the table turned toward her. Thaddeus went white as a sheet. I'm sorry, what investigation? Mr. Ashford asked. The one involving embezzled client funds and falsified financial records, Serafina continued. It's been all over the financial news. Thaddeus stood up, so fast his chair fell backward. Who the hell are you? The mask was finally off. No more charming smiles or smooth words. Just raw desperation and rage. Get this pauper away from our table, he shouted, his voice echoing through the dining room. The same words. The exact same words he had used 2 years ago at Romano's. But this time, Serafina Hayes wasn't going anywhere. Have you ever seen someone realize they've been played by a master? Security, Thaddeus screamed, looking wildly around the Ashford dining room. Get her away from us. But there was no security at a family dinner. Just shocked faces staring at a man having a complete breakdown in front of people whose respect he desperately needed. Thaddeus, what's wrong with you? Mrs. Ashford asked, clearly horrified by his outburst. Don't you know who this is? He said, pointing a shaking finger at Serafina. This is my ex-wife. She's been stalking us, ruining everything. Serafina stood up slowly, her voice calm and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to properly introduce myself. My name is Serafina Hayes Montenegro, and everything your son-in-law just said is absolutely true. The silence that followed was deafening. I have been watching him, she continued. I've been planning, waiting, and yes, ruining his life piece by piece. Just like he ruined mine 2 years ago. Vivian burst into tears. Sarah, how could you? I trusted you. And I genuinely came to care about you, Serafina replied. Which is why you deserve to know the whole truth. She pulled out the DNA results Cordelia had given her. Your husband isn't the father of your baby, Vivian. Marcus Hartwell is. The same Marcus who's been helping Thaddeus steal money from clients. Mr. Ashford grabbed the papers with shaking hands. As a retired banker, he could read financial documents better than anyone. His face grew darker with every page. These bank records show systematic theft, he said slowly. Thaddeus, please tell me this isn't real. But Thaddeus Montenegro, the man who had once controlled every situation with his charm and lies, couldn't form words. He just stood there, watching his world collapse in real time. The FBI will arrest him tomorrow morning, Serafina continued. His business partner already confessed and named Thaddeus as the mastermind. Your daughter will be a widow within the week. Vivian looked at her husband with pure hatred. You destroy her life, and then you destroyed mine. How could I have been so stupid? Vivian, please, Thaddeus begged. I can explain everything. Like you explained the affair? Like you explained the missing money? Like you explained why you called security on your first wife for asking about your mother's medical bills. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Even the household staff, who had been quietly serving dinner, stopped to stare. Mrs. Ashford stood up, her voice ice-cold. Get out of her house. Both of you. Right now. Mother, please, Vivian started. Not you, darling. Him. And take this woman with you. She pointed at Serafina. I don't care what he did to you. Using our family to get revenge makes you just as disgusting as he is. Serafina felt the words hit like physical blows. She had gotten her revenge, had seen Thaddeus's perfect world destroyed, but she had hurt innocent people in the process. As they were escorted to the door, Thaddeus grabbed her arm. Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything. Serafina looked into the eyes of the man who had once promised to love her forever. All she saw was a broken stranger who had made the same mistakes that destroyed her life. No, she said quietly. I'm not happy. And that's the problem. What if the best revenge isn't destroying someone but becoming everything they said you could never be? 6 months later, Serafina Hayes sat in a small coffee shop, reading the morning newspaper. The headline made her smile. Montenegro investment scandal results in prison sentences. Thaddeus got 7 years for embezzlement and fraud. His business partner got 5. The stolen money was returned to clients through a victims' compensation fund that Serafina had quietly established using Cordelia's resources. But the real news was buried on page 6. Local woman opens free financial counseling center for divorce survivors. Serafina had used her Grey-Tance fortune to create something meaningful. The Hayes Center helped women who were going through difficult divorces, offering legal advice, financial planning, and emotional support. Everything she wished she had during her darkest days. The coffee shop door opened, and Vivian Montenegro walked in. She looked different, stronger somehow, with shorter hair and clothes that reflected her own taste instead of what others expected. "Thank you for meeting me," Vivian said, sitting across from her former friend. "How are you doing?" Serafina asked genuinely. "Better than I expected. The baby is healthy, and Marcus is actually a wonderful father. Turns out he left his wife months ago because he fell in love with me, not just for the affair." Serafina smiled. "I'm glad something good came out of all this mess." "That's actually why I wanted to see you." Vivian pulled out a check. "This is my share of what Thaddeus stole from your divorce settlement. I found it in his private accounts." The check was for $200,000. Enough to buy back some of what Serafina had lost, but nowhere near enough to undo the pain. "I don't want it," Serafina said, pushing the check back across the table. "Please. I need to make this right. Then donate it to the Hayes Center. Help other women who are going through what we both survived." Vivian nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I was part of destroying your life. You were young and in love with someone who lied to both of us. The only person responsible for Thaddeus's choices is Thaddeus." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two women who had been enemies becoming something like friends. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said finally. "Do you ever regret it? The revenge, I mean." Serafina thought about the question seriously. "I regret hurting you and your family. I regret becoming someone who could manipulate people the way Cordelia taught me. But do I regret stopping Thaddeus from hurting other people? No." "What happened to your great-aunt?" "She disappeared again. Left me a note saying her work was finished." Serafina smiled. "But she left the Hayes Center with enough money to run for 50 years. As Vivian got up to leave, she turned back. "For what it's worth, I think you're a better person now than when we first met. Even after everything that happened." Alone again, Serafina looked out the coffee shop window at the busy street. Somewhere out there, Thaddeus Montenegro was learning what it felt like to lose everything. But she had learned something more important. The best revenge wasn't destroying the person who hurt you. It was becoming someone so strong, so successful, and so genuinely happy that their opinion of you stopped mattering completely. Serafina Hayes had been called a pauper by the man who claimed to love her. But she had become something far more valuable than wealthy. She had become free.